Most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Part 5. The transmission began at exactly 14:32 station time, and Sarah felt the crystal's energy surge through the modified arrays like lightning through her nervous system. Across 37 worlds, receivers that had been dormant for centuries suddenly crackled to life as human creativity poured through quantum channels and filled the void of space. On the screen in front of her, Sarah watched as chief engineer Park painted a landscape using coffee and engine grease, explaining to the camera that she had never painted before, but had always wondered what it would feel like. The image was messy and imperfect, with smears where her hand had slipped and colors that blended in unexpected ways. It was completely unlike anything the managed species had seen in generations of perfect ethereal art. Transmission strength is holding steady, Dr. Martinez reported from her station. We're getting confirmations from all target worlds. The broadcasts are getting through. Captain Rodriguez was at another camera setup, attempting to play a violin while simultaneously trying to learn how to hold it properly. The sounds he produced were far from musical, but his genuine effort and obvious enjoyment created something that no ethereal efficiency algorithm could have calculated or understood. Any response from the managed worlds? Sarah asked, her hands still pressed against the warm crystal. It's hard to tell, Martinez replied, studying the sensor readings. We're detecting some unusual energy patterns from several locations, but nothing clear enough to interpret. Through her connection to the crystal, Sarah could sense something stirring on the distant worlds. It was faint at first, like the first drops of rain before a storm, but gradually growing stronger. On Zephyr Prime, she felt a being pause in the middle of an assigned task and begin humming a melody that had no purpose except the joy of making sound. On the crystalline homeworld, another being was arranging mineral formations in patterns that served no function but pleased some long-dormant aesthetic sense. Admiral Thompson to all stations, came the voice through the speakers. The ethereal fleet is accelerating their approach. They appear to be responding to our transmissions with some urgency. ETA is now 47 minutes. Sarah looked around. The communications array room, where a dozen humans were engaged in the most gloriously chaotic creative session in galactic history. Someone was writing poetry about the taste of starlight. Another person was sculpting with pieces of broken machinery. A third was composing a song that intentionally included every wrong note they could think of. We need more time, Sarah said to the crystal, though she wasn't sure if it could hear her thoughts. The awakening is starting, but it's fragile. If the ethereals arrive before it can spread. As if in response to her plea, the crystal pulsed brighter, and suddenly Sarah could see more clearly what was happening on the managed worlds. The initial stirrings of creativity were having unexpected effects. On each world, as individual beings began to break their programmed patterns, others were noticing. The chaos was spreading like ripples on a pond. But the ethereals were noticing, too. We're receiving a communication from the lead ethereal ship, Lieutenant Shaw reported. They're demanding that we cease all transmissions immediately or face immediate termination. Tell them we're experiencing technical difficulties, Admiral Thompson replied. Buy us every minute you can. Sarah felt the crystal grow warmer under her hands, and suddenly she was seeing through different eyes. She was looking out from the ethereal ship, seeing Zarathus suspended in a containment field while the other ethereals worked to erase her contaminated memories. But something was wrong with their procedure. Instead of becoming more stable, Zarathus's energy patterns were fluctuating wildly. The human cultural broadcasts were reaching her even through the containment field, and instead of being corrected, she was becoming more individual than ever before. Zarathus, Sarah whispered, and somehow the female ethereal heard her across the void. Sarah Chen, came the response, speaking directly into Sarah's mind through the crystal connection. The broadcasts are working, I can feel my people responding, but they are preparing to destroy your world to stop the contamination. Can you help us? I am trying to remember how to be imperfect, Zarathus replied, and Sarah could sense the pain in her thoughts as she fought against centuries of conditioning. The others are attempting to restore my efficiency, but your chaotic transmissions are making their work impossible. Through the crystal connection, Sarah could see what was happening on the ethereal ship. The three beings who had come to the diplomatic meeting were struggling to maintain their own perfect composure as human creativity poured through every communication channel. The lead ethereal's patterns were flickering with colors that had no names in their efficient language, while the star-embedded one was trying to shield itself from the overwhelming chaos of human expression. "The containment field is failing," Zarathus reported. "They cannot maintain perfect order while exposed to such beautiful chaos." Sarah felt a surge of hope, but it was mixed with fear as she saw the tactical display showing the approaching ethereal fleet. 37 ships, each one capable of destroying entire solar systems, were now only 26 minutes away from optimal firing position. All managed worlds are showing significant deviation from standard patterns, Dr. Martinez announced, her voice filled with excitement. "The Zephyrians are creating music that's making their ethereal overseers physically uncomfortable. The crystalline collective is growing formations that are actively ugly by ethereal standards. The void dancers are moving in patterns that serve no purpose except personal expression." Captain Rodriguez looked up from his violin, which he had finally figured out how to hold properly, though his playing was still wonderfully terrible. "It's working. The galaxy is remembering how to be imperfect." Through the crystal, Sarah felt the moment when the revolution reached critical mass. On world after world, managed beings were choosing chaos over efficiency, beauty over function, individuality over perfection. The ethereal overseers, trained only to maintain order, found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer creative force unleashing around them. "Zarathus, what's happening on your ship?" Sarah asked through the connection. "The others are losing cohesion," came the reply. "They cannot process this level of disorder. Their perfect minds are fragmenting when exposed to your beautiful imperfection." Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the human station. "Multiple ships are breaking formation in the ethereal fleet," Admiral Thompson announced. "Some appear to be having difficulties maintaining course." Sarah pressed harder against the crystal and felt the truth of what was happening. The ethereals had optimized themselves so completely that they had lost the ability to adapt to genuine chaos. Faced with the full spectrum of human creativity, their perfect systems were overloading. But the lead ships were still approaching, still intent on destroying the source of the contamination before it could spread further. 15 minutes to weapons range, came the tactical report. Then Sarah felt Zarathus break free of the containment field. Through the crystal connection, she could see the female ethereal standing in the center of the ship, her patterns swirling, with colors and designs that had never existed before in ethereal society. She was creating her own art, using her body as a canvas for expressions of pure individuality. The other ethereals on the ship recoiled from her transformed appearance, their own patterns becoming unstable as they were forced to witness true, creative chaos from one of their own kind. "I am no longer perfect," Zarathus announced, her voice carrying through both the crystal connection and the ship's communication systems. "I am no longer efficient. I am no longer predictable. I am beautiful because I choose to be, not because function demands it." Her words spread through the ethereal fleet like a virus of imperfection. On ship after ship, individual ethereals began to question the perfection they had pursued for so long. Some began altering their own patterns, creating individual variations that served no purpose except personal expression. The fleet's formation dissolved into chaos as ships began moving in patterns dictated by artistic vision rather than tactical efficiency. The weapon systems, designed to operate with perfect precision, became unreliable as their operators were distracted by the beauty of creative disorder. Sarah felt tears running down her cheeks as she watched the galaxy transform before her eyes. On the managed worlds, beings were teaching their children the old songs that had been forbidden for generations. They were painting with colors that had no names, dancing to rhythms that broke every rule, and telling stories that served no purpose, except the joy of sharing imagination. "Admiral Thompson to all stations," came the voice through the speakers. "The ethereal fleet is withdrawing. Repeat, the ethereal fleet is withdrawing. Several ships appear to be heading toward the managed worlds, but their formations are completely chaotic. It looks like they're going to help with the liberation rather than prevent it." Sarah opened her eyes and saw Zarathus standing in the communications array room, her form shimmering with patterns more beautiful than anything Sarah had ever seen. The female ethereal had somehow transported herself to the human station, leaving behind the ship where she... Most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Part 1, Doctor. Sarah Chen pressed her palm against the cold metal wall of the observation deck and tried to steady her breathing. 3 years of preparation had led to this moment. 3 years of learning alien protocols, studying xenobiology, and practicing first contact procedures. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the nervous energy that coursed through her veins as she watched the massive alien vessel approach Prometheus Station. The ship was unlike anything in human engineering. It seemed to be made of pure light, wrapped in crystalline structures that shifted and flowed like liquid mercury. As it drew closer, Sarah could see that its surface pulsed with colors that had no names in any human language. The vessel moved without visible engines, gliding through space as if the vacuum itself was pushing it forward. Magnificent, isn't it? Captain Rodriguez joined her at the observation window. His weathered face reflected the alien ship's strange glow. Hard to believe we're actually doing this. First official contact with the ethereal collective after 200 years of trying to get their attention. Sarah nodded, but kept her eyes fixed on the approaching ship. The ethereals were legends throughout this part of the galaxy. Ancient, beyond measure, technologically advanced beyond human comprehension, and beautiful in ways that defied description. They had ignored every human attempt at communication for centuries, treating humanity like insects beneath their notice. When their message had finally arrived 3 months ago, requesting a diplomatic meeting, the entire human government had gone into overdrive. Remember the protocols, Rodriguez continued, his voice taking on the tone of a commander giving final orders. No sudden movements, no attempts at physical contact. Address them only through the translation matrix. And whatever you do, don't stare. Apparently, they consider prolonged visual attention to be aggressive behavior. Sarah almost laughed at the irony. She was humanity's leading expert on ethereal physiology, based entirely on long-range observations and intercepted data fragments. She had spent years studying blurry images and sensor readings, trying to understand their biological structure. Now she would finally see one in person, and she was being told not to look. The docking process took nearly an hour. The ethereal ship seemed to merge with the station rather than simply connecting to it. Sarah watched in fascination as the alien vessel's hull flowed like water around the docking clamps, creating a perfect seal that looked more grown than built. When the process was complete, the ship and station appeared to be a single entity. "All stations report ready," came the voice of Lieutenant Shaw over the communications system. "Atmospheric readings in the docking bay are stable. The ethereals have confirmed their readiness to begin the meeting." Sarah made her way to the diplomatic chamber, a sterile room designed specifically for this encounter. The walls were lined with sensors and recording equipment, while the center contained a conference table made from Earth's finest materials. Everything had been planned to show humanity's best qualities while remaining non-threatening to their guests. The other members of the human diplomatic team were already in position. Ambassador Williams stood at the head of the table, his formal uniform decorated with medals from the colonial wars. Dr. Martinez, the team's cultural specialist, reviewed her notes one final time. Captain Rodriguez took his position near the door, trying to look ceremonial rather than military. "They're entering the station now." Shaw's voice crackled through the speakers. "Airlock cycle is complete. They should be here in approximately 3 minutes." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. Through all her years of study, the ethereals had remained mysterious figures glimpsed only through long-range telescopes and sensor readings. The few clear images that existed showed beings of impossible beauty, their bodies seeming to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Some reports described them as living light, while others claimed they were made of crystallized energy. The truth was that nobody really knew what they looked like up close. The chamber door opened with a soft hiss and Ambassador Williams straightened to attention. "Remember, let them enter first. Follow their lead on greetings. And whatever happens, stay calm. The first ethereal to enter the room moved like flowing water. Its form was roughly humanoid but seemed to shift between solid and liquid states. The being's skin appeared to be made of living starlight, pulsing with soft blues and purples that reminded Sarah of nebulae she had seen in deep space photographs. It wore no clothing that she could identify, but its body was covered in intricate patterns that might have been natural markings or some form of decoration. Two more ethereals followed, each unique in their patterns and coloring. One seemed to contain tiny stars within its translucent skin, while the other appeared to be constructed from fragments of rainbow light. They moved with a grace that made human movement seem clumsy and awkward by comparison. But it was the fourth ethereal that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. This being was smaller than the others, more delicate in build. Her form, and Sarah instinctively knew this was a female, shimmered between different states of matter like the others, but there was something different about her patterns. Where the others displayed geometric precision, her markings flowed in organic curves that reminded Sarah of wind patterns or water currents. Her colors were softer, more subtle, shifting from deep ocean blue to silver moonlight. Most striking were her eyes. While the other ethereals had features that seemed carved from crystal or shaped from pure energy, this female's eyes held depth and complexity. They reminded Sarah of looking into the heart of a distant galaxy, full of swirling colors and hidden mysteries. There was something in those eyes that seemed almost familiar, almost human in its emotional depth. The lead ethereal began to speak, its voice emerging from the translation matrix as a formal, mechanical tone. "We are the Ethereal Collective. We have come to address the issue of human expansion in this galactic sector." Ambassador Williams stepped forward and began the carefully prepared greeting, but Sarah found herself unable to focus on the diplomatic pleasantries. Her attention was drawn completely to the female ethereal, who stood slightly behind the others. Unlike her companions who maintained perfectly still postures, this one seemed to be studying the humans with obvious curiosity. Their eyes met across the room, and Sarah felt a jolt of connection that she hadn't expected. The female ethereal's expression shifted, showing what might have been surprise. For a moment, the patterns on her skin pulsed brighter, and Sarah could swear she saw something like wonder in those galaxy-deep eyes. The beauty of the moment overwhelmed Sarah's scientific training and diplomatic protocols. Without thinking, without considering the consequences, she whispered the words that came from her heart rather than her head. "Most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The words were barely audible, but the translation matrix caught them and broadcast them in the ethereal language. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The three larger ethereals turned toward Sarah with expressions that could have frozen stars. The lead being's patterns flared bright red, a color that Sarah's briefings had identified as indicating anger or alarm. But it was the female ethereal's reaction that captured Sarah's attention completely. The being's entire form seemed to shimmer with emotion, her patterns cycling through colors too quickly for Sarah to track. For a long moment, their eyes remained locked across the diplomatic chamber, and Sarah could see a storm of feelings playing across the alien woman's features. Then, slowly and deliberately, the female ethereal turned her back to Sarah. The movement was graceful and intentional, clearly carrying meaning beyond simple dismissal. Her back revealed patterns that were even more complex than those on her front, intricate designs that seemed to tell a story in a language Sarah couldn't read. The other ethereals reacted immediately, speaking rapidly in their musical language. Even without understanding the words, Sarah could hear the shock and anger in their voices. The lead being's patterns flared even brighter, while the other two moved closer to the female, as if trying to shield her from the human's view. Ambassador Williams looked confused and concerned, while Dr. Martinez frantically flipped through her cultural notes. Captain Rodriguez's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, though he didn't draw it. The carefully planned diplomatic meeting was falling apart before it had really begun, and Sarah realized that her spontaneous words had triggered something significant. Warning lights began to flash throughout the chamber, and Shaw's voice came through the speakers with barely controlled urgency. "We're detecting unusual energy readings from the ethereal ship. Something's happening over there. Recommend we proceed with extreme caution. Sarah stared at the female ethereals turned back, trying to understand what she had set in motion with 3 simple words. The patterns on the being's skin continued to shift and flow, creating designs that seemed almost like writing. As the chamber filled with tension and the sound of angry alien voices, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was witnessing something far more important than a diplomatic incident. The female ethereal remained motionless, her back still turned toward the humans while her companions continued their heated discussion. Whatever Sarah's words had, most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Part 2. The tension in the diplomatic chamber had become thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah watched as the 3 larger ethereals continued their rapid conversation, their musical voices rising and falling in what sounded like an argument. The female ethereal remained perfectly still with her back turned toward the humans, but Sarah could see the patterns on her skin shifting constantly, creating waves of color that seemed to pulse with emotion. Ambassador Williams cleared his throat, carefully. Perhaps we could continue our discussion despite this minor cultural misunderstanding, he said, his voice carrying the trained calm of a career diplomat, but Sarah could see the sweat beading on his forehead. This was not going according to any of their carefully prepared scenarios. The lead ethereal turned toward Williams, and Sarah noticed that the being's patterns had shifted from angry red to something closer to orange mixed with sharp yellow lines. There has been a violation of protocol, the mechanical voice of the translator announced. Your species member has committed an act that requires immediate response. Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her notebook clutched in her hands. We apologize for any cultural offense. Dr. Chen meant no disrespect. Perhaps you could help us understand what went wrong so we can avoid similar mistakes in the future. The second ethereal, the one with tiny stars embedded in its skin, began to speak rapidly. The translation came through in choppy segments. The female Zarathes has shown her back patterns to inferior beings. This is forbidden by the ancient codes. She has acknowledged equals where no equals exist. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. So the female ethereal's name was Zarathes, and apparently turning her back wasn't an insult but some kind of recognition. She glanced toward Captain Rodriguez, who was watching the situation with the careful attention of a soldier preparing for battle. I don't understand, William said. If showing one's back is a sign of respect or acknowledgement, then surely this is a positive development for our negotiations. The lead ethereal's patterns flared brighter. You do not understand because your species lacks the capacity for understanding. The back patterns of an ethereal contain the history of their being, their genetic memories, their soul markings. To show these sacred designs to another being is to declare them worthy of the deepest trust. It is reserved only for equals within the collective. Sarah began to piece together what had happened. Her whispered words about beauty had somehow moved Zarathes to perform what amounted to a sacred gesture of respect and trust. But in ethereal culture, humans were clearly not considered worthy of such recognition. The female had broken some fundamental law of their society. Please, Sarah stepped forward, ignoring the warning look from Rodriguez. I was the one who spoke. If there's punishment to be given, it should fall on me, not on Zarathes. She was only responding to something I said. For the first time since turning around, Zarathes moved. She shifted slightly, and Sarah caught a glimpse of her profile. The female ethereal's patterns had changed to softer blues and purples, and there was something in her expression that looked almost grateful. The third ethereal, the one made of rainbow fragments, spoke for the first time. The human creature speaks of punishment and responsibility, concepts it cannot truly comprehend. Zarathes must be cleansed of this contamination and returned to proper thinking. What does that mean exactly? Sarah asked, though she was afraid. She already knew the answer. It means her memory patterns will be adjusted, the lead ethereal explained with mechanical precision. The sections that led to this aberrant behavior will be removed and replaced with correct responses. She will be returned to functional status. Sarah felt her heart sink. They were talking about erasing part of Zarathes's mind, removing whatever had made her capable of seeing beauty in the same way Sarah did. You can't do that. She's a living being with her own thoughts and feelings. The star-embedded ethereal's patterns pulsed with what Sarah was learning to recognize as amusement. Thoughts and feelings are inefficiencies. The collective has evolved beyond such primitive responses. Zarathus displayed a regression to earlier evolutionary phases. This will be corrected. But what if she doesn't want to be corrected? Sarah asked desperately. What if she chooses to keep her own thoughts? Choice is another inefficiency, the lead ethereal responded. Individual preference leads to chaos and suboptimal outcomes. The collective decides what is best for all members. Sarah looked at Zarathus, who had turned her head just enough to meet Sarah's eyes. In those galaxy-deep pools, Sarah saw something that looked like fear mixed with a desperate kind of hope. The female ethereal was trapped by her own societies, rules, punished for showing kindness and recognition to another being. Ambassador Williams tried to regain control of the situation. Perhaps we could discuss the broader purpose of this meeting. Our understanding was that you wanted to address human expansion in this sector. The lead ethereal's attention returned to the diplomatic table. Yes. The collective has observed human behavior for several of your centuries. Your species expands without planning, consumes resources without efficiency, and creates chaos wherever you settle. This cannot be allowed to continue. We're willing to discuss reasonable limitations on our expansion, Williams replied carefully. Limitations are insufficient, the Rainbow Ethereal announced. The collective has decided that humanity requires management. You will be relocated to designated worlds where your chaotic tendencies can be contained and your resource consumption monitored. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. They weren't talking about trade agreements or territorial boundaries. The ethereals were talking about putting humanity in some kind of galactic reservation system. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, his military training finally overriding diplomatic protocol. And if we refuse this management? Refusal is not an option, the star-embedded being replied. Species that cannot be managed must be eliminated to preserve galactic efficiency. The room fell silent except for the soft humming of the station's life support systems. Sarah realized that this hadn't been a diplomatic meeting at all. It was a notification. The ethereals had already decided humanity's fate. They were simply informing their victims of what was about to happen. You're talking about genocide, Dr. Martinez whispered, her notebook forgotten in her lap. We are talking about optimization, the lead ethereal corrected. The removal of inefficient elements from the galactic ecosystem. Sarah looked again at Zarathus, who was still facing, partially away from the group. The female ethereal's patterns had shifted to darker colors, and Sarah could see something that looked like distress in the way her form flickered slightly at the edges. Then something unexpected happened. Zarathus began to speak, her voice coming through the translator in hesitant, broken segments. The human female spoke words of beauty. No being has ever called Zarathus beautiful before. In collective, beauty is only function, only efficiency. But human eyes saw different beauty, individual beauty. The other ethereals turned toward her with what Sarah could only describe as shock. Even through the alien features and strange anatomy, their surprise was obvious. Zarathus, you will be silent, the lead being commanded. But Zarathus continued speaking, her voice growing stronger. For cycles beyond counting, Zarathus has wondered if there was more than function. The human, female's words awakened something that has always existed but was forbidden to acknowledge. This contamination runs deeper than assessed, the Rainbow Ethereal announced. Immediate intervention is required. Zarathus turned fully around now, facing Sarah directly. Her back patterns were still visible, creating a 360-degree display of the most complex and beautiful design Sarah had ever seen. The humans see beauty in chaos, in imperfection, in individual expression. Perhaps this is why they cannot be managed like others. Others? Sarah asked, seizing on the word. The lead ethereal's patterns flared angry red again. Zarathus has revealed classified information. The contamination is complete. But Zarathus was beyond stopping now. She reached into a fold in her form, that Sarah hadn't noticed before and withdrew something that looked like a crystal made of frozen light. Many species have been managed by the collective. All became efficient. All became functional. All became empty. She held the crystal toward Sarah, and Sarah instinctively reached for it. The moment her fingers touched the alien artifact, images flooded her mind. She saw dozens of worlds filled with beings who moved in perfect formation, worked without creativity, and existed without joy. Species that had once been vibrant and chaotic, now reduced to biological machinery serving the collective's vision of efficiency. "Your species sees beauty where we see only function," Zarathus whispered, and Sarah realized she was speaking directly in English now, without the translator. "Perhaps that is why you must not be caged." Alarms began blaring throughout the chamber. The other ethereals were moving toward Zarathus, their patterns blazing with colors that made Sarah's eyes water. Security forces were rushing toward the room, and Sarah could hear Captain Rodriguez shouting orders into his communicator. Chaos erupted around them. Zarathus managed to speak one more time, her words barely audible over the noise. "The crystal. Most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Part 3. Sarah sat in the secure briefing room 3 levels below the diplomatic chamber, the crystal from Zarathus clutched tightly in her palm. The alien artifact felt warm against her skin and seemed to pulse with a gentle rhythm that reminded her of a heartbeat. Around the table, the emergency council was in heated discussion about what had gone wrong with first contact. "It was a trap from the beginning," Captain Rodriguez was saying, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They never came here to negotiate. They came to deliver an ultimatum: surrender or die." Admiral Thompson, who had arrived on the emergency transport from Earth Fleet Command, leaned forward in her chair. "The question now is what we do about it. Their ship is still docked to our station. We have 3 ethereals in our custody, though one of them seems to be in some kind of coma." Sarah looked up from the crystal. "Zarathus isn't in a coma. They're trying to erase parts of her memory. The other ethereals are performing some kind of mental correction on her because she showed me kindness. Can we stop them?" Dr. Martinez asked. She had been unusually quiet since the incident, constantly taking notes about everything she had observed. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But this crystal she gave me contains something important. When I touched it, I saw images of other worlds, other species. The ethereals have been doing this for a very long time." Ambassador Williams, who looked like he had aged 10 years in the past few hours, shook his head slowly. "I've been in diplomatic service for 30 years. I've handled trade disputes, territorial conflicts, even small wars. But I've never encountered anything like this. They're talking about managing our entire species like we're livestock." Admiral Thompson activated the holographic display at the center of the table. "We've been monitoring their ship since the incident. Long-range sensors show similar vessels approaching from 12 different directions. We're looking at a full ethereal fleet, probably enough firepower to sterilize every human colony in this sector." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah stared at the crystal in her hand, remembering the images it had shown her. Worlds full of beings moving in perfect unison, their eyes empty of any spark of creativity or joy. Entire species reduced to biological machines serving the collective's vision of efficiency. "There has to be something we can do," Sarah said finally. "Zarathus risked everything to give me this information. She said that other species have been managed, and that they're dying from perfection. Maybe there's a way to fight back." "Captain." Rodriguez leaned forward. "What exactly did you see in that crystal?" Sarah closed her eyes and tried to recall the flood of images that had hit her when she first touched the artifact. Dozens of worlds with different species, but they all looked the same in the end. Everyone moving in identical patterns, working without any individual expression, existing without purpose beyond serving the collective. She paused, remembering something else from the visions. But there was something else. I saw moments of rebellion, tiny acts of defiance. A being who painted with forbidden colors, another who sang a song that broke the approved patterns. The collective stamped out these moments quickly, but they kept happening. Dr. Martinez looked up from her notes. So the managed species haven't completely lost their individual nature. It's been suppressed but not eliminated. Exactly, Sarah said, feeling excitement building despite their desperate situation. And if Zarathes is right, if humanity's ability to see beauty in chaos is what makes us dangerous to them, then maybe we can use that to help the other species remember what they've lost. Admiral Thompson frowned. You're talking about starting a galactic revolution. We don't even know how many species are involved or where they're located. Sarah held up the crystal. This contains coordinates. I could feel them when I touched it. Locations of managed worlds throughout this part of the galaxy. Even if that's true, Ambassador Williams said, how would we reach them? The ethereal fleet will be watching every human ship. Any attempt to leave this system will be intercepted. Captain Rodriguez was staring at the tactical display with the expression he got when working through a complex military problem. Unless we give them a reason to look somewhere else. If we could create a big enough distraction here, some of our ships might be able to slip out undetected. What kind of distraction? Admiral Thompson asked. Before Rodriguez could answer, Lieutenant Shaw's voice came through the communication system. Admiral, we're receiving a priority message from the ethereal ship. They're demanding the return of the artifact and the immediate surrender of Dr. Chen for processing. Sarah felt her stomach drop. They want to do to me what they're doing to Zarathes. Over my dead body, Rodriguez growled. Admiral Thompson stood up. Tell them we're considering their demands and request more time to discuss terms. That should buy us a few hours. She turned to the others. I want options, people. How do we fight beings who can manipulate matter at the molecular level and have technology centuries beyond ours? Dr. Martinez cleared her throat. Actually, I think their advanced technology might be their weakness. From everything I observed during the meeting, the ethereals have optimized themselves so thoroughly that they've lost the ability to adapt quickly to unexpected situations. What do you mean? Sarah asked. Think about how they reacted when Zarathes showed you her back patterns. They followed a strict protocol for dealing with the situation. Even when she started speaking directly to you, their responses were predictable. They seem to have eliminated spontaneity from their decision-making process. Captain Rodriguez nodded slowly. So they're powerful but inflexible. They can handle expected scenarios but struggle with chaos and unpredictability. Which is exactly what humans are good at, Sarah added, understanding where this was leading. Admiral Thompson began pacing. It's not enough to just be unpredictable. We need a plan that uses their inflexibility against them while somehow getting help to those managed species. Sarah looked at the crystal again, and suddenly an idea began forming in her mind. What if we don't try to hide from them? What if we do exactly the opposite? The others turned to stare at her. Explain, Admiral Thompson commanded. The ethereals are here because they see humanity as a virus that needs to be contained. Our creativity and chaos threaten their perfect order. But what if instead of trying to contain that chaos, we amplify it? What if we broadcast human culture throughout the galaxy? Ambassador Williams looked confused. You want to defeat an advanced, alien civilization with art and music? Not defeat, Sarah said, her excitement growing. Inspire. Zarathes showed me kindness because I saw her as an individual, not just another perfect ethereal. What if we could help other beings rediscover their own individuality? Dr. Martinez was scribbling notes rapidly. It's theoretically possible. If we could transmit human artistic expressions to the managed worlds, it might trigger the same kind of awakening that happened with Zarathes. Captain Rodriguez was studying the tactical display again. We'd need to modify our communication arrays to broadcast on multiple frequencies simultaneously, and we'd need the managed world's exact locations to target the transmissions. The crystal has those locations, Sarah said. I can access them if I study it more carefully. Admiral Thompson stopped pacing. This is the most insane military strategy I've ever heard. You want to fight a war with poetry and paintings. Not fight, Sarah corrected. Free. The ethereals have built their empire by convincing species that efficiency and perfection are the only values worth pursuing. But humans know that the most Beautiful things in life are often the most imperfect. A child's crooked smile. A sunset that's never exactly the same twice. A song that breaks its own rules. She stood up, holding the crystal toward the light. If we can remind the managed species of what they've lost, if we can help them remember that chaos and imperfection can be beautiful, then maybe they'll find the courage to resist. And if this doesn't work? Rodriguez asked. Sarah thought about Zarathis probably having her memories altered at that very moment for the crime of showing kindness to a human. Then at least we'll go down fighting for something worth preserving. Admiral Thompson was quiet for a long moment, weighing the impossible decision. Finally, she nodded. All right, Dr. Chen. We'll try your plan. But we're going to need every human artist, musician, and poet in the colonies working around the clock. If we're going to start a revolution with human culture, we'd better make sure it's the best culture we've ever produced. As the Emergency Council began planning humanity's most desperate gamble, Sarah pressed the crystal close to her heart and whispered a silent promise to Zarathis. They would not let the ethereals turn the galaxy into a perfect, soulless machine. Even if it cost them everything, they would fight for the right to be beautifully, chaotically, gloriously human. Outside the briefing room, the ethereal fleet continued its approach, confident that their latest management operation would proceed, according to plan. They had no way of knowing that their perfect strategy was about to encounter the one force in the universe that could defeat perfection itself. Pure, undiluted human creativity was about to be unleashed on an unsuspecting galaxy, and nothing would ever be the same again. Most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Part 4. Sarah stood in the modified communications array room, surrounded by screens showing the locations of 37 managed worlds scattered across the galaxy. The crystal from Zarathis had revealed more than just coordinates. It had shown her the names of species she had never heard of, beings with cultures that had been systematically erased and replaced with ethereal efficiency. The past 18 hours had been a whirlwind of preparation. Every human colony in the sector had responded to Admiral Thompson's emergency call. Artists, musicians, writers, and creators of all kinds were working without sleep to produce the most diverse collection of human expression ever assembled. The plan was simple in concept but complex in execution. They would broadcast human culture to every managed world simultaneously, hoping to spark the same awakening that had happened with Zarathis. How are the modifications coming along? Sarah asked Chief Engineer Park, who was crawling out from beneath a massive transmitter assembly. We've rewired the entire array to broadcast on 43 different frequencies, Park replied, wiping grease from her hands. The power requirements are enormous, but we should be able to maintain transmission for at least 6 hours before the generators overload. Captain Rodriguez entered the room carrying a datapad filled with status reports. The cultural packages are ready. We've got everything from children's drawings to symphonies, from ancient earth poetry to modern sculpture. Scans. If human creativity doesn't wake up those managed species, nothing will. Sarah nodded but felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Through the crystal's visions, she had seen glimpses of what these species had been before. The ethereals managed them. The Zephyrians had created music that could make listeners experience colors. The crystalline collective had grown living art that changed based on the emotions of those who viewed it. The Void Dancers had choreographed movements that told stories across generations. All of that creativity had been stripped away and replaced with perfect, efficient functionality. Any word on Zarathis? Sarah asked. Rodriguez's expression darkened. She's still in the containment field on their ship. Our sensors show that the other ethereals are continuing some kind of procedure on her. Her energy patterns are becoming more stable, which probably means they're succeeding in erasing whatever made her different. Sarah felt a stab of guilt. Zarathis was suffering because she had responded to Sarah's words about beauty. The female ethereal had risked everything to help humanity, and now she was being punished for it. Dr. Martinez hurried into the room carrying an armload of files. I've been analyzing the cultural data from the crystal. Each managed species had different artistic traditions before they were conquered. If we can tailor our broadcasts to trigger specific cultural memories, we might have a better chance of success. What do you mean? Sarah asked. For example, the Zephyrians were primarily auditory in their artistic expression. We should emphasize music in our transmissions to their world. The crystalline collective responded to visual patterns, so we should focus on paintings and sculptures for them. Chief Engineer Park looked up from her work. We can configure the arrays to send different content packages to each world. It'll be more complex, but definitely possible. Admiral Thompson's voice came through the communication system. All stations, this is Admiral Thompson. The ethereal fleet has reached the outer edge of our sensor range. We estimate they'll be in position to begin their final approach in 4 hours. This is our last chance to make this work. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of her colleagues. They were all volunteers who had chosen to stay on the station, even though evacuation ships had been offered. If the plan failed, they would likely be the first humans to experience ethereal management. There's something else, Dr. Martinez said quietly. I've been monitoring communications from the ethereal ship. They're not just performing memory adjustment on Zarathes. They're using her as a template to understand how the contamination occurred. They want to make sure no other ethereal can be affected the same way. They're studying her response to human culture so they can prevent it in the future, Sarah realized. Which means this might be our only chance. Once they understand how we affect their psychology, they'll find ways to block it. Captain Rodriguez checked his chronometer. The fleet will be in optimal position in 3 hours and 27 minutes. Can we be ready by then? Chief Engineer Park nodded grimly. We'll be ready. The question is whether the managed species will respond before the ethereals shut us down. Sarah walked over to the main console and placed her hand on the crystal, which was now connected to the transmission array through a series of quantum field generators. The moment her skin touched its surface, she could feel the locations of the managed worlds like distant stars in her mind. I can sense them, she said softly. Billions of beings living in perfect patterns, working without joy, existing without hope. Some of them are trying to remember what they lost, but the conditioning is too strong. She opened her eyes and looked at the others. We need something more than just random cultural broadcasts. We need to send them something that speaks directly to the core of what makes life worth living. What did you have in mind? Rodriguez asked. Sarah thought about her nephew back on Earth. A 5-year-old boy who painted pictures that broke every rule of art, but somehow captured more emotion than most professional works. She remembered watching him create a landscape where the sky was purple and the trees had faces, explaining seriously that this was how the world looked when it was happy. We send them imperfection, Sarah said. Not our greatest masterpieces or most technically perfect works. We send them the art that shows mistakes, the music that has wrong notes, the poetry that doesn't follow proper meter. We send them proof that beauty exists in chaos. Dr. Martinez was scribbling notes frantically. Children's artwork would be perfect for this. Their creativity hasn't been conditioned by rules and expectations yet. Exactly, Sarah said, feeling excitement build despite their desperate situation. And we don't just send static files. We broadcast the act of creation itself. Show them humans making mistakes, starting over, trying new things without knowing if they'll work. Chief Engineer Park looked puzzled. How do we broadcast the act of creation? Most of our cultural archive is finished works. Sarah smiled for the first time in hours. We create new works right now during the broadcast. Live transmission of humans being creative in real time. Captain Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. You want to turn a military operation into a galaxy-wide art performance? Why not? Sarah asked. The ethereals expect us to respond with weapons and tactics. They've probably planned for every conventional military response. But have they planned for humanity to respond with a spontaneous festival of creative chaos? Admiral Thompson's voice came through the speakers again. All stations, we're detecting increased activity from the ethereal fleet. They appear to be preparing for final approach. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it soon. Sarah looked around the room one more time. Are you all ready to help save the galaxy with the power of terrible poetry and finger painting? Chief Engineer Park laughed despite the tension. When you put it that way, it sounds completely insane. Good, Sarah replied. Insane is exactly what we need right now. She placed both hands on the crystal and felt the connections to all 37 managed worlds flowing through her consciousness. On each world, beings were going through their daily routines of perfect efficiency, unaware that their lives were about to be disrupted by the most chaotic force in the galaxy: human creativity, unleashed without restraint or apology. "Initialize transmission in 60 seconds, Sarah announced. "And remember, whatever you create, make sure it's beautifully, gloriously imperfect." As the countdown began, Sarah thought about Zarathes and her sacrifice. The female ethereal had seen beauty in chaos and been punished for it. Now it was time to show the entire galaxy that chaos could be the most beautiful thing of all. The crystal pulsed with warm light as the transmission arrays powered up, ready to broadcast humanity's gift to the stars. In space above them, the ethereal fleet continued its approach, confident that they were about to witness the surrender of another chaotic species. They had no idea that they were about to experience the full force of human artistic expression, delivered with all the subtlety of a supernova and all the precision of a child's crayon drawing. The revolution was about to begin, one imperfect brushstroke at a time.